Hello and welcome back to Identity Architects, the podcast that spotlights individuals who are changing the way that data is used to deliver richer customer experiences. I'm your host Ben Cottee, and for this episode, our sales director Sunil Modha had the opportunity to speak with James Cottee, Principal Client Partner EMEA at Tripadvisor. Modha and James had a great conversation about a fascinating industry, travel and lifestyle, touching on data collaboration, the fair value exchange, and much, much more. Before I hand it over to Modha and James, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button so you know when the next episode of Identity Architects lands. But without any further delay, here's Modha and James.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Identity Architects. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with James Cottee from Tripadvisor. And before we go into a round of quick-fire questions, James, I've known you. We've been speaking together. We've been together for nearly 2.5 years of this partnership now. It'll be great for the wider audience listening in to get a bit more or background on who James is, and more importantly, who is Tripadvisor and what's your role within the organization?
No problem. I'll try and keep it short and sweet, but thank you very much, Modha, for inviting me along to the podcast. Happy to be here. I'm James Cottee. I'm a principal client partner at Tripadvisor. So I work within the media and partnerships team, focusing on growth clients, and growth for us means non-endemic, so brands that aren't endemic to travel, non-travel brands. So I get to work with lots of different brands across many different industries, helping them to get exposure to the world's largest travel platform. So
Amazing, thanks, mate. So let's go. Let's kickstart the quick fire questions. And to start the podcast off, let's take a trip down memory lane. Sorry, James, this might expose our age on this podcast today. They're not intentional. What's your earliest memory of our industry, the advertising and marketing industry? What made James enter?
I think my earliest memory of advertising would have been McDonald's, which is probably a
Fair
brand
point.
that I still like to enjoy every now and again now. But I think when I was a lot younger, watching ads on TV with Ronald McDonald and Happy Meals and things like that, ads that I guess in today's age would not cut it, but definitely set the tone for me to be a kind of a lifelong fan of McDonald's and passing that down to my children.
It's a very interesting and a nice memory to have. If and McDonald's is what made James enter advertising. Well, that's new for everyone. So, and what was your first job? I mean, we've known each other for quite a while, and you've got a very extensive portfolio of roles and the industries you've worked in. But what was the first advertising or marketing job you took?
So my first role in advertising was, I think it was back in 2012, which is for a company called Ingenium, who were kind of a small bespoke data owner and digital marketing company. So we had a big database of public sector decision makers. And my role was to help B2B brands to communicate with those public sector decision makers through things like surveys, webinars, email marketing, and ultimately helping businesses to drive leads. So I think that was my first step into kind of the advertising space, but also from a sales perspective in terms of my career, the first chance I had to kind of work closely with marketeers, and felt that was my calling, really. Essentially, bringing sales and marketing together and selling to marketeers, I felt was something that I was very comfortable doing. So that was my first stint, and I think I was there for 5 years, and then I went on to Auto Trader. I spent a couple of years there, and then the last nearly 3.5 years at Tripadvisor. And I think throughout the rest of my career, I'm always going to be wanting to be around kind of the advertising media industry.
It is. It's an exciting journey we're in, and you've been in the industry long enough. You're kind of following the changes, the rapid growth in our industry, the different tech solutions, and in just general, the way the industry is shaping up because of the regulations we're faced with. Um, it's ever growing and it's always new. There's always a new challenge. There's always a new topic. Um, we speak about this quite frequently. It's almost like we just started yesterday our careers. So yeah, it's a nice space to be in. Um, so, given your experience and your skill sets and all that knowledge you've gained over the last few years, knowing what you know now, um, anything you would probably say to yourself today when you started this career?
It's an interesting question. I think thinking back to when I started out in my kind of sales career and then moving into advertising, I never intended on being here. I always wanted to be a fighter pilot was my my first intention. So it's not quite comparable, but I think finding something you're passionate about or something you enjoy. I think when you work for a business or in an industry that is a personal interest, it always makes things a lot easier. I think you can kind of convey your passion and find it interesting. So the days fly by, and I think it works quite nicely in that respect. And I think if I was to go back to myself starting in my very first sort of sales role, I would probably say, to be a bit more fearless, not worrying about who I'm talking to, their seniority and things like that. And also would absolutely say to myself that cold calling is character building for sure, and something that you'll benefit from in the long run.
Absolutely. Uh, and you're right. You're right. I think, you know, one of the beauties about our industry as well is the social aspect of it, the networking aspect of it. Yeah, you never know who you're going to bump into when you're walking around Charlotte Street, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, you never know who you're going to bump into when you walk into your favorite restaurants because our industry is so big but so small at the same time, and everyone's well networked. Um, Even if, when people move on to new adventures, they don't go far.
Yeah.
So it's constantly, once a colleague or a friend of yours might be a working in the same organization, or they're moving to a competitor and they're moving back to one of your partners. So it's a nice industry to be in. I always trying to compare it. My wife's a pharmacist, and a medical profession. It's two different worlds we live in almost.
Yeah.
So, and also, it's nice to know. I just found out something new about you, that you've got a passion not just for cars but also planes.
Anything that moves, Moda. Boats, planes, cars, anything you can drive and have fun in it has always been something I enjoyed growing up. Never had the chance to. I've had the chance to pilot like a small two-seater plane in the past, but never something as exciting as a fighter pilot. So I get my fix watching Top Gun instead of doing anything like that.
I totally agree. We share a common grounds there. I once progressed through all the way through Air Cadets, so
Oh
something you
wow!
didn't know about me. Yeah, wanted to become a pilot myself. Always playing Flight Simulator. Great brand as well. But yeah, I think there was, and to that point, I was selling music CDs in HMV and Virgin. That's the closest I could get to pilots and planes and kind of understand how I can get myself flying one of those big jumbo jets. But something just clicked, and I wanted to enter the advertising industry, and here we are today. So
Here we are today. Absolutely. I think
hopefully, in the coming years, we could potentially become those pilots that we've always wanted to.
exactly. I think working in travel, I'm part of the way there. I do get to encounter pilots every now and again when I'm traveling for business and for personal. So
There you
it's
go.
there in some guys.
There you go. um, here's a nice question, and probably more relatable to where we are today as an industry. Um, we, we've become obsessed with identity. Um, the whole concept of identity, the ability to identify individuals, making targeting more hyper targeted, marketing strategies becoming all around um, consumer first, etc. But the tricky part of this question is, James, if one of your daughter's nurseries or schools called you up and said, James, we want you to come in tomorrow and do a bit of a show and tell of your industry, your role, and what you're currently working on, how would you explain identity to that for a group of 10-year-olds?
How would I explain identity? Very good question. I think I had a moment recently with I've got, as you know, two daughters and a little boy
Yep.
who's definitely not old enough to understand what I'm saying just yet. But my eldest was asking about my job and what I actually do. And she's 7. And I think I said to her, there's this thing called the internet. And there are lots of websites on the internet. And Daddy works for one of those called Tripadvisor. And people come to Tripadvisor for looking for holidays and for restaurants and things like that. And my role is to help people to to advertise on that website. So to bring their brands to people that have a kind of a passion for travel and for lifestyle. So that was kind of like the first part of your question, how I explained it to my daughter, and she can relay that back to me now. So I would tell my daughter's school to rely on her rather than me. But in terms of identity, I'll probably say it's identity is what makes you in terms of your what your name is, your interests, where you live. If I was to describe it to my daughters, I'd probably say it's like you're a cake, and the ingredients are your interests and your passions and what you like and your characteristics, and all of those ingredients make that cake. And that's how I would describe identity. I think they like cakes. I think that would help them to understand what that means.
I think that's it. I mean, for everyone else listening in, that might be a good prop to use for the wider industry when we're explaining identity, cakes, and all the ingredients within it. And it's true, right? I kind of relate this back to becoming, when you're a new parent, and identity is a very interesting piece of and a part of life. It's ever evolving. Um, Identity doesn't stay static because in the younger years you're developing yourself, your physically and personally, your mindsets, um, and the things you liked when you were younger to things you like when you're older. Again, the identity changes.
Yeah.
And when we relate that back to where we are today, how are brands capturing that? How are publishers capturing that? How are the wider industry or just organization in general taking note of all of those attributes to associate to one individual, right? And then once you know that about individuals, how do you utilize that in a meaningful and in a privacy compliant manner?
Exactly. I think, like to your point, it changes. It can, it doesn't necessarily have to be over years. I think over, weeks and months, your identity can change in terms of, things that you learn that you're interested in, or perhaps you're not so much interested in anymore. So, I think from a brand's perspective, just to be conscious of that, your customers might change and the platforms they use might change, and just to, you've got to keep your finger on the pulse on an ongoing basis, don't you?
Absolutely, and of course we'll dive into this in the more in the topics later on in the session. But it's a good touch point, and I do love your analogy. I may have to use that again, explaining it when to current partners and prospective partners. So, nice cake analogy. Um, I like this one, and it's also a nice opportunity for me to slip in a few cheeky comments. What keeps you awake at night? And I'm going to end that with you can't, with the exception of Spurs not winning a trophy since two.
That's kept me up for many, many years. I actually sleep exceptionally well. I sleep like a baby. I'm a very in terms of, I mean, I've got young children who come into our bed quite often, but I don't move. I sleep very, very well, and sleep's very important to me. So from a personal standpoint, my answer would be nothing keeps me awake at night.
A
Um,
topic for a different discussion. I might need to take some tips from that. Sleeping while the kids are running in. We've all experienced those.
yeah.
Uh,
Professionally, I think I always want. There's always like um, I've got a huge to-do list of things that I want to do and brands I want to speak to and people I want to get back to. I think that list can be endless. And I think, as we've all experienced in a bit with hybrid working at home and heading into the office, it's sometimes, especially at home, it's difficult to switch off and to figure out, what does a good day look like. So that sometimes I get in bed at night and think, oh, I wish I'd done that, or I didn't quite get around to doing that. So I'd say that's probably, if anything were to keep me up at night, that's what it would be. But No, I sleep like a baby for sure.
Well, I'm glad it's not spares. And that said, we've just all learnt you sleep like a baby, so you get a decent couple of hours of sleep, well rested. What gets you motivated in the morning? What gets you out of bed? What's that instinct of, right, I can't wait to start my day the next day?
See, that's the interesting thing. So I like my sleep and I struggle in the morning, but I do get up for sure. And I think when you enjoy a job and when you enjoy the kind of the industry that you're in, I don't sort of wake up in the morning seeking motivation. I know every day is going to be different, and I know I'm going to enjoy what that day brings. So yeah, I think to my earlier point in terms of I love to travel, I love to dine out, I love to explore things locally, domestically, and further afield. So I'm kind of working for a company that brings all those together. So I'm kind of combining my personal passions with my professional ones. So yeah, I think that's what motivates me to get going. I'm talking about things that I'm genuinely interested in, and hopefully helping my clients and prospects to look at things in a slightly different way and helping them on their journey to improve their advertising and perhaps consider a platform they hadn't considered before.
Yeah, it is an interesting one, isn't it, James? I mean, going back to my point earlier on, is there's Mrs. Mode is a medical profession, and part of their industry is obviously helping humans and individuals in at different life stages. And when you relate that back to our industry, it's very similar. We're helping brands, we're helping partners, clients, prospects, we're helping the industry shape into something that's meaningful overall, right? And especially in the in the recent years, is ensuring consumers are protected,
Yeah,
and it's ever growing. um, and again, it's a nice place to be in, is waking up in the morning knowing you are genuinely making a difference.
exactly. We're not saving lives like Mrs. Moda, but we're definitely yeah, we are making a difference in our own way.
Exactly. So everyone is always doing good for the world. That's the way I like to
Exactly.
put it. Now we're going to go totally off topic. I do
Go
like
for
this
it.
question. I really do like this question, because it kind of shows one's personality. Um, if there was a song that was a soundtrack to James's life, what would that be?
It's a very good question. When you shared this with me kindly before the podcast, I think it's probably the most difficult question I had to answer. So I turned to data, as one would, working in the kind of the data world, and I opened up my Spotify and learned that my number one played song of all time is "Superstition" by Stevie Wonder.
Nice, yeah, yeah,
So I don't know if that is a soundtrack to my life necessarily. I think the song's about not making decisions and acting upon irrational beliefs, which I'm sure you can apply to a career in sales and in advertising. But
yeah, yeah.
as a song, it's something that every time I hear it, it kind of lifts my mood, and yeah, I think that's
It
the
has,
one I
isn't
would
it?
go for.
It's a great song. I Overall, it's just really got that vibe to it, gets you going. It's one of those sounds, those songs you can just listen throughout the day and just brings happy, positive vibes.
Exactly.
Yeah, keeps the room going. Um, if you looked at my Spotify playlist, um, it's not a true reflection of me. You're probably going to see lots of Peppa Pig songs,
And
Renaissance, and Baby Shark in various different themes. Um,
that's just your commute into work, Moda.
and I made that mistake, so I didn't know if you could. This was actually a setting, but um, it's only when a relative pointed it out and questioned my playlists, which was Spotify's got this feature when you publicly share what you're listening to, all the social platforms that you may connect to also can get to see that Mode has played Baby Shark today, and it's constantly on repeat. So I finally managed to understand how to switch that off. It's now
Yeah,
off. But mine's a Seven Nations Army by White Stripes. Again, it's one of those pump feel songs. Gets me going.
yeah, that's a
Right.
great representation of you, I think, Moda. That song, always
Um,
on the go.
it's also got sentimental memories of when me and Mrs. Moda had our first date. But that's a discussion over beers. Um, right now we've learned James. Firstly, thank you so much. We've learned a lot about you in the um, last couple of questions of just getting to know you in this podcast. We're going to switch gears a little bit and and take get go get going into our industry, um, and just learn a few more things about the way Tripadvisor are moving. How your role plays importance and value to Tripadvisor's objectives, um, and to kickstart it off into our topic is we all know, it's been a topic of discussions for the last 2-3 years. But the third party cookie is almost extinct. We all know that.
Mhm.
Um, However, and I did have this on my notes earlier on. The original date was it was potentially going to be extinct by the end of 2023.
Yeah, it's been
Um,
extended again, hasn't it?
it has, and the most recent announcements is the deadline's been extended. Now, um, everyone's on different journeys: media owners, brands, agency partnerships, data owners, tech solutions themselves. But I guess for TripAdvisor, I guess if I asked the question, are you prepared for the cookieless era? The answer naturally would be yes, just because of the nature of your business and the fact the way you are capturing first party data. But I guess I'm gonna kind of twist the question up a little bit and say, what are you doing to further enhance your value proposition in this space?
Okay. Very good question. I think, yeah, to your point, we're very fortunate to have reams of first party data. We're the world's largest travel platform across lots of different markets, so we capture lots
Yeah,
of data on users that come to TripAdvisor, not only from a travel perspective, but also people looking at things locally. So we start to
yeah,
learn about people's takeaway habits and the restaurants they like to dine in and things like that. So from a third party cookie disappearing perspective, we're in a very strong place.
yeah,
And I think sort of moving forward, there's a number of different things we're looking to do and are implementing already to kind of future proof ourselves as an advertising team within TripAdvisor, which is things like improving our membership signups. So many people access TripAdvisor without signing in. We're starting to look at opportunities whereby, as a member, you get benefits, discounts, and things like that. So that again will help us to learn a lot more about our users, and also just really trying to think about the future around being personalized and contextual, tagging parts of the site that perhaps we might not have tagged before. I think we've spoken about this in depth before, Moda, but with my role looking at brands outside of travel, quite often, I'm working with them to help them to understand what's the alignment. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes less so. And so by understanding what else interests our users and our consumers apart from the fact that they're on a travel website or they're on our website to find the nearest restaurant in their local community. Just looking at things like that really around other interests. It might be that they like to shop, or it might be that they are hot on collecting Avios points and things like that. Just really sort of leveraging that throughout our website to sort of increase our sort of segments and ways in which advertisers can target users on TripAdvisor.
and that's really interesting, isn't it? That the capturing of your own first party customers at the sign-in point. And you touched on a really a key item, which was incentivizing them to sign on in the first place.
Yeah,
Um, I think that's probably been the most challenging point for a lot of organizations of, as history has shown, is, you know, as consumers, you're able to go to your favorite inventory, read your favorite content, navigate through the different website sections, and never have to provide any information about yourself, right? Uh, but over the years, and especially the way the industry is shifting, there is that need of how do we get to know our customers better? and what do we know about them? I think, you know, providing these days users are happy to just hand over an email address if it's going to improve and help enhance their old user experience, but also capturing that additional information about us as individuals is equally important of
Yeah,
that, because it just helps that user experience and the
exactly. It's
journey.
also like providing the value as well. I think we see it a lot. I shop in Tesco's quite often, and we've probably seen it. You might have seen it yourself with the club card prices at the moment. Like if you walk into Tesco's without your club card, you're going to be paying a lot more than you would
Yeah,
if you were to use it. So I think they're kind of taking that approach of, look, if you're a member and you're loyal to our brand, we'll reward you for it. And we find with Tripadvisor, because we've been around for such a long time, people have grown up with it. They are loyal to the brand already, and so we're trying to explore ways and opportunities to kind of return that value back to them. And because we've got the relationships on the B2B side as well as the B2C side, I think that's where we can sort of leverage those partnerships to bring value to our users. And as a result, they get a better experience, they get more value, and we also learn a little bit more about them to help advertisers to be a lot more personalized and contextual.
absolutely. It's a great um, development from TripAdvisor of operating in that way. Um, and also, thanks for touching on that Tesco point, because I only realised those preferred rates a couple of weeks ago, and I did walk into my local Tesco Express. Again, as always, Mrs. Modha reminded me that I need to get milk on a Saturday. Totally forgot. Kids woke up Sunday, no milk. A 7 o'clock journey to the local Tesco, only to realise there's two different rates, and I didn't have my Tesco Club card.
Yeah, £10 without and £1 with.
There you go. But again, if you look at the wider industry and other organisation, it's a nice incentive, isn't it? For those who are not club card members, it doesn't cost you to become a member, but it gives you incentives of having different rates of purchasing products.
Exactly. I
So
think it's really
it's,
smart.
it's just, which strategies do you deploy to ensure you're not losing your customer base, but allowing them to, helping the retention and obviously acquiring new ones, basically. And that nicely goes on to the second question. And thank you so much for that insights, James. That was really helpful.
No worries.
Um, in general, we are now in this era of first-party data, right? If you look at the way businesses are operating, if you all over our industry press, it's all about identity, first-party data capturing, etc. If you look at tech solutions, they have evolved and they're moving into this first-party cookie collection, etc. And it's also it's an integral part of any marketing strategy these days. From a I guess TripAdvisor plays the roles of a advertiser and a media partner, right?
Yeah.
But overall, what would be the top three recommendations for any brand or publisher that that you would like to give or would give in terms of preparing for the foreseeable future, and especially the way that our industry is shifting?
Apart from talking to InfoSum, I've got I've got a few ideas. So I think first and foremost, having doing an audit of what's your current situation, where are you advertising currently that relies on third party cookies, and
Yeah.
just particularly in the programmatic space, getting an understanding of what your current situation is. Is it from a percentage perspective, if 50% of all of your overall advertising is on relies on third party cookies, you need to start thinking long and hard about what your strategy looks like for the long term. So I think it's probably not going to be quite 50%. Of maybe overstep the mark a little bit there, but I think certainly doing an audit, seeing how exposed you'd be, and doing that as the starting point would be my recommendation. And then thinking about, where does your brand have a right to play? So I've probably touched on this a little bit in terms of my work at TripAdvisor, working with retail brands and auto brands and finance brands. Like, you wouldn't necessarily think that an auto brand, for example, might want to advertise on TripAdvisor, but perhaps thinking a little bit outside the box in terms of what are the behaviours of people on a platform like ours. Do they travel in their car? Do they take road trips? I mean, there's I like to think there's always an angle for any brand, but I think if you are moving away from relying on third-party cookies, thinking about what areas you're currently sort of advertising in, and perhaps some that you're not, and thinking, do I have a right to
Yep.
play
Yep.
here? And then finally, I think just thinking about the quality of the audience. So once you've identified where you have a right to play, is there a good, strong quality audience that you can sort of matches what your brand has to offer? Is it contextual? Are you able to reach people in a meaningful way with the right message at the right time? So yeah, that would be my top three.
And they're great, by the way, great points you've just made there. And the one I did love, and is probably helpful for every organization, lost, especially the way we're moving, is the MOT of servicing of your own business, right?
Yeah,
And it's a really important one first and foremost before you deploy any external strategies is what do I know about my own business? Who are my customers? What are we doing with them today? What do we need to do? Because that naturally evolves your business, but also helps it for the foreseeable future, right? And I guess you don't need. I mean, I don't know if you can share this, but from Tripadvisor's perspective, do you have a team that does this in place to help you all in your different departments, or is this a role that every member within Tripadvisor kind of?
yeah. I think I can only talk for TAPS, which is the TripAdvisor Advertising and Partnerships sort of team within TripAdvisor that I sit within. But I think across the wider business, of course, we'll be looking at how from our own advertising perspective, doing that audit and thinking about where we have a right to play, and perhaps what we've seen from the pandemic, kind of this move away from not just being a travel platform and people using us as a lifestyle platform for local recommendations. Do we start to perhaps advertise in slightly different areas? I'm not close to that, but certainly from our perspective and the brands that we work with, yeah, we're very fortunate to have a wonderful team within sort of data and audience and data science that can help brands to understand what their audience, how their audience behaves on TripAdvisor, and sharing those kind of insights so that to the point we were making earlier about doing that audit and finding out where you have a right to play. Talk to brands maybe that you haven't spoke to in the past, or talk to your existing brands that you do work with, and try and understand better how your audience operating, or how your consumers, operating on that platform, and does that maybe present a slightly different angle for you that you hadn't considered before. So yeah, we're very fortunate to have a data team that help me and help brands to understand that.
That's really interesting, and thanks for sharing the additional insights there, James. Um, but as we move away from third-party cookies and we enter the world of first-party, collecting those first-party identifiers is great, but we all know um, the consumers come first.
Yeah,
And to ensure consumers come first, there's obviously the importance of organizations like TripAdvisor and others um, to ensure they are, you know, following data privacy regulations and ensuring, um, you know, that all the kind of regulations are met, that the right legal place are in place. Now, not a topic for legal itself, but I guess overall, when organizations are shifting into that mindset and that mode, um, do you foresee any challenges for other organizations or just in general as an industry?
yeah. I think that there's always going to be challenges. I think it always comes down to data, and how clean is either your first party data that you know about your existing customers, but also the partners that you work with. I'm sure, Modi, you've seen it yourself, being retargeted for things that you've already purchased, and frustrating things like that. We sort of feel like, I made a commitment to that brand because I saw the ad in the first place. I went ahead and purchased it, and now I'm being asked to buy it again. Things like that. I think
It's
is
still happening. I was an owner of a specific automotive brand. It's now been sold.
yeah,
They still message me every month of how my vehicle's doing. And just recently, because it was a year anniversary, they called me in for a service.
yeah. I also get that the same from various sort of dealers I've used in the past,
Yeah,
reminding me that an MOT is due on a vehicle that I haven't owned for 3+ years. So yeah, to that point, it's is your data clean? Are you taking action to make
yep,
sure that it is? Because I think that ultimately then impacts the experience you're giving your potential customers. If you know who they are, and if we use this example, if you know what car they're own and when that car is due for its MOT, when it needs its service, and you're sending communications in a personalised way, people will use you, and people learn to love your brand and become loyal. But I think when to your point, you get those frustrating emails or calls and it's out of date, it puts you off a little bit.
yeah. It goes back to it impacts the user experience, right?
Exactly.
And I guess the point, your answer to this specific question goes back to your point you made earlier on, which was fundamentally going back to data audit or understanding your own business, your consumers, um, and that could fundamentally remove some of the challenges or help address the challenges so you can move forward in a positive manner.
Yeah.
Thank you, James. Um, I like this one. Partnerships, collaborations. Um, they're an integral part of every business, across every industry, not just ours in advertising and marketing. Um, but we see a lot of it, and it's been happening for years, and just in different ways. From a TripAdvisor perspective, what do you look for when collaborating with a partner?
I think it comes back. Great question, by the way, Moda. I think it comes back to do you have a right to play in the kind of travel and lifestyle space? I think when I certainly look at the brands that I want to speak to and the brands that come to us, there's always we call it a travel angle. So I think it's do you have a right to reach our audience, and are you going to enhance their experience, whether that's from a travel perspective or a lifestyle perspective. So I think yeah, that would be my sort of go-to. Really, do you have a right to play? Can we find the right angle? Is your offering something that resonates well with our audience? Does it make their experience better? And I think we work with a real range of brands, or certainly me within growth and the wider team across finance and telecoms and retail and consumer packaged goods. There's so many different sort of sectors and industries that you wouldn't necessarily associate with travel, but actually there's going to be something. There's going to be a particular angle that we can find. So I think that's what we tend to look for is does your brand resonate with our audience, and can we help you as well? Can we help your brand to get the exposure you're looking for and to achieve your objectives? And I wouldn't be shy sometimes you know to walk away from brand partnerships that just perhaps aren't the right fit, or we're just trying to put a square peg in a circle hole, or whatever the phrase is.
Uh, and a segue into the next question. It's a great point you've just made. Is we're seeing more and more of these collaborations take place. We're also seeing collaborations take place where many moons ago we thought, oh, actually, these two brands wouldn't even sit together, or they actually that's an odd partnership they've just made. But when we're this new journey of collecting first party data allows us to do that sort of planning or insights at a very top level, just saying, actually, it's worth a try. Who would fit well with TripAdvisor, even though we thought that's not a match to be made.
Yeah.
Um, but then they do become relevant. Um, and based on that, so you're on this day today. I'm in this day today. But today's about James. What kind of collaborations would you like to see more in our, and not just in the industry, just in general? And probably what other industries would you like to see coming together that we haven't really thought about in the past?
Um,
I guess they're two questions, so we can split them.
yeah, that's a really good question. I think we've seen some really interesting partnerships, even like in recent times, like with Lego and IKEA coming together, Audi and BrewDog. We actually had a really interesting one with my lovely colleagues over in the US. We had KY Jelly and TripAdvisor coming together, and you see these random brands, and you think, what an interesting combination. But actually, once they've formed this partnership and they've started to develop the content or the messaging, you think you kind of wonder what life was like before you saw that partnership. So I think for obvious reasons, working in the travel industry, I'd love to see you know brands from all different industries thinking about travel in a number of different ways. Like with the sectors that I focus on at Tripadvisor, finance. I think when people travel abroad, people are moving away from using cash, especially post pandemic. So utilizing products that are low fee and are easy to use, and perhaps even digital. I think the finance industry and travel go quite nicely together, hand in hand. You've got automotive that we've touched on. I think retail as well. Like retail's a massive sort of advertising sector,
Yep.
and one that if you look at some of the partnerships on Love Island recently, I'm not sure if you've been following it, Moda. My wife certainly has, and I've had it on in the background.
I'm the exact same. It's been on in the household.
Yeah, yeah. So I think with like the eBay partnership there, and clothing and being away on holiday, I think those two go hand in hand, and we see that a lot from our own insights that people like to spend money before they go on a trip, or go on a trip and spend money on clothing and footwear and things like that. So I think there's so many different opportunities. I'd really like to see these partnerships go live on our platform that are really quite unexpected, because I think it excites people, and I think it's good for it creates that kind of that fame that both brands are looking for when coming together in a partnership.
Absolutely. And again, you made another really interesting point with the finance industry, especially with the late, the new breed of the challenger banks,
Yeah,
because they are the ones offering low fees, no exchange rates, and allowing you to just digitally um, transfer and exchange money into the local currency of the destination. Most recently, you probably know this because I've been going on it for a while, but my Project Marrakesh trip that finally took place, it was really easy. We exchanged British pounds into Moroccan dirhams instantly, um, it and and utilize the local currency ATM machines and just withdraw cash as you would as a local.
yeah.
Fantastic service because you're not thinking about all those high fees as you would in airports, etc. And it's those little things, especially in our current economic, really helps.
Exactly. And I think when you travel, Mona, like you think about how are you getting there, where are you going to stay, how are you going to get to the place that you're going to stay, what am I going to do while I'm there? But there's so many things I think pre-travel that we sort of do without thinking about it. To your point, what card am I going to use while I'm out there? What am
Yep.
I going to wear? What clothes do I need to wear? Is it going to be hot? Is it going to be cold? And I think this is where those brands outside of travel with us have a real opportunity um, to capitalize on an audience that need that information. And I think that where we have been fortunate to work with some of these neobanks and with the retail brands, they're seeing really strong performance, because it's something that people don't think of, but when you remind them of it in that key moment, it resonates really well, and it works for we help our consumers to travel better, and our partners achieve their objectives.
It's an everyday human checklist, isn't it?
Exactly.
Thank you, James. And it's great because to your point, and we're seeing these, we're having these active discussions that there are we probably are on this journey of seeing more and more collaborations take place. We're going to see, it'd be nice. Would love to see non-endemic collaborations take place as well, um, and would love to see how those partnerships flourish over the next couple of years. So we are heading towards the end of the podcast. The wind down questions, just to end today's show. Anything we've missed? Anything um, I haven't asked, or any topics that you might be relevant or would like to mention to today's podcast?
I don't think there's anything we've missed. To your point, we can talk about this all day, every day, which we do quite often. I think I just want to reiterate really just this. We know there's been a delay with the third party cookie, but people need to start thinking about their own first party data strategies anyway. So just to continue to explore and start from the beginning. This idea of the auditing and speaking to brands and partners as we do quite often, Moda with your partners and with ours, just exploring what does our audience also feature. Are they a customer of your brand? Are your customers active on Tripadvisor? It doesn't cost you anything to kind of learn that. And I think at that point, if you're doing that with all of your existing partners and potential partners that you feel you have a right to the sector's a right area for you to play in, then you're going to be in a strong position, because you can start to think about how you reach your existing customers, but also go after new ones. So yeah, not so much something to add, but something just to reiterate.
Absolutely. And that's a great point to reiterate. And on that note, James, sadly, I do have to say goodbye. But just before I do, I want to say thank you for joining us on today's podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. To your point, we could speak all day long. But you're a very well-connected man. And if there's anyone you could nominate in this industry or even outside the industry to that we could welcome on the podcast, who would that be? Anyone you could think of?
So well connected, the person I'm going to suggest isn't someone I've ever spoken to. But I think when I was thinking about this question and having reviewed and listened to some of the other Identity Architect podcasts, one I think would be really interesting is Pizza Express. Not someone not a brand I've spoken to. I'm sure they're present on Tripadvisor, but I think their app that they launched recently, whereby they're kind of collecting sort of members based on what you do in store, but also the pizzas that you buy in the supermarket, the ones that you get delivered to you. And I think it's just a really interesting. I just would love to hear more about how that came about, how that's performing, what they're doing with that data. And I think when I looked up the person that might be responsible for that, I think he was also responsible for doing something similar at Costa around loyalty and getting more first-party data. So that would be my recommendation.
Do you have an individual to name at Pizza Express?
I think that the person was Arslan Sharif. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. The Chief Digital Officer. As I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, as I'm sure lots of us do, he seemed to be the person that would be responsible for that kind of data collection and how they use it. So just love to hear his brains being picked on a podcast.
Amazing, James. Well, we will hope to be in touch with Ashlan from Pizza Express, and hopefully he will be able to join us on the next podcast. James, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Moda.
Thanks again to James for joining us. It's fascinating to hear what Tripadvisor are doing in an incredibly interesting space. Over the last few years, we've seen retail media networks become incredibly lucrative concepts, and to me, travel really feels like that next media network opportunity. All that leaves for me to do is to remind you to hit that subscribe button wherever you enjoy podcasts so you know when the next episode of Identity Architects lands. But until then, thanks for listening.